Pastor Drew, we finally got to our first parable in our parable series.
Yes.
The wheat and the tares. And so the wheat and the weeds grow up together in the field, a picture of the world as it is now. As we wait his second coming, there's good and evil kind of simultaneously coexisting. It brings up an important question that many people have asked and have still. Why does God permit evil? How does the parable of the wheat and tares answer that question for us?
I don't know if it necessarily answers that question.
Or what light does it shed?
Right, the light. That's maybe a better way to put it. Obviously, for believers, when you come at it from a Christian perspective, we understand that God knows best, and that God has seen fit to allow the sons and daughters of light and the sons and daughters of darkness to grow up together, and that the final separation or division of those is going to happen at the end of time. And the focus for the disciples based on that teaching and obviously other teachings of Jesus is that, you're going to have to live with this, you're going to have to work through this, but, you need to remain on task, the task of proclaiming the gospel, the task of proclaiming Jesus as the answer to whatever issues we have in the world. And so that leaves us to speculate somewhat, but I think on good grounds, because of particularly some of the things that Paul says in his letters, that I think the potential advantage for God choosing to allow good and evil people to grow up together is so that the good people are stronger, more faithful, have been built up because of that adversity. It's a way that God prepares us for eternal life with him.
Yeah. One of the main points from the parable is that, why are the weeds allowed to persist so that all of the wheat makes it to maturity?
Right.
And some of the implications, like don't pull it up so that you don't pull up the wheat with it. One implication that I always find compelling and kind of powerful is answering that question: why does God permit evil? Because he loves me so much, which is weird, but he could have been done at the ascension. That could have been it. Right. Well, I guess there's some prophecies about a second coming, so he could have came right back.
Yeah.
Right. So why does he permit evil for 2,000 years? Because I am a wheat that he wanted to reach maturity. And so he persists with evil because he loves me so much.
Yeah.
He loves his chosen so much. Do you have a comment there?
Well, you could go in a philosophical direction as well, and this is a question that I've thought about. Why did we fall into sin originally? Because God gave us the gift of free will. The optimal world that he could create included people who could freely give their love to him. So they're not created robots, but they have free will, and through that, God wanted to have a true relationship with human beings. What changes? What changes when we get to heaven? When we get to heaven, is it that we're not going to have a free will? I would argue no, we will still have a free will. But what is going to prevent us from rebelling against God ever again is the exposure that we have had to evil in this world, sin and evil and wickedness. And so that when we do reach glory, we're going to look at that and we're going to think, why would anyone ever choose that again?
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking of during the sermon was a connection to the other parable of the sower, which is really similar. And just was thinking, you hear of the seed sown on the rocky soil, and it doesn't have deep enough roots, so the first challenge sweeps it away. And the other is seed sown among the weeds, and it has nice roots, but eventually it's choked out. But if you kind of compile these parables, and maybe that's not right to do, but you just wonder, in our congregation, maybe I see it most as parents pray for children, prodigal children, or children who have taken their faith less and less serious. Right? They say, I gave them deep roots, right? We raised them in Christian home and church and school, and here they are now among the weeds. But the hope of the parable of the wheat and tares is there is wheat that grows up among the weeds that God is patient with and reaches maturity. And he's not going to just yank it up because it's among the weeds.
Yeah. And actually, a lot of commentators that I read in preparation for the sermon, and I don't agree with this wholeheartedly, but they wanted to very much emphasize that the field in this parable is the church, not the world. That it's focused on the church, not the world, even though the parable itself says that the field is the world. And so, because it's a kingdom parable, some commentators seem to think, well, the kingdom on earth presently, as God has established it, is the church. And I don't like to go so narrow myself. But it definitely applies to the church. There is good and evil. There's a visible and invisible church. I just think that's limiting the parable somewhat.
Interesting. So that's curious that the text would explicitly acknowledge that the field is the world, and yet they would say the Christian world or the church world.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought of when the sermon was going on is how nice it would be to go on about Augustine's city of God, city of man and city of God competing, but I can't get through it however many times I try, so I can't leave a comment about Augustine.
The most striking thing about the parable, and I didn't really necessarily get to touch on it as much as I would have had I had more time, but I think it's a wonderful gift of grace that God chooses not to pull up the tares before the right time. I mean, it's a gift of grace. It's a representation of His patience and His mercy that He kind of endures evil until the optimal time for the most people to be saved, and that's grace.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
it's like the Canaanites,
right? Until they've filled up the amount of wickedness that, But yeah, the other thing, and this is, more of a downside, but also more of a spur to Christians for evangelism is, the reality of this day when the sons of God and the sons of the evil one are going to be separated, and how God has seen fit to include us in building up the wheat and building up the sons of God and advancing the kingdom and proclaiming the gospel. Man, there's an urgency to that when you hear a parable like that coming from the lips of Jesus himself.
Yeah. The other thing I find compelling in this whole conversation, just about evil in the world and God's sovereignty over it, to be good and Calvinist here at the end. Dr. Frank Turek goes around to different colleges and he fields questions, and he's got this big slideshow. So, people ask the same dozen questions.
Sure.
And so he's got these slides kind of at the ready to answer them. And he's commented, and I've shared this in a sermon before, that he always gets these two, and they're really ironic. The one is, why does God order the destruction of these peoples, these evil peoples in the Old Testament? And then the other one is, if he's good, why would he allow the Second World War, Nazism, to be such an atrocity? And he says, on the one hand, you're mad that he destroys the evildoer. And on the other hand, you're mad that he doesn't destroy the evildoer.
Yep.
And so ultimately you say, God is patient, desiring that none of the elect will
Perish.
perish. That's the answer, straight from the word.
Yeah.
God is sovereign, and he has decided how he'll deal with evil.